Yeah, good afternoon and welcome to our roundtable on philanthropy in science with a very fancy, as I think, title, Accelerating Discovery Beyond Borders. So I'm really looking forward to the discussion on that. My name is Marte Kessler. I'm a member of the Extended Management Board at Stifterverband. We are a non-profit organization and funding organization for education, research and innovation, and I will be the moderator of the session today. Well, it's a great pleasure, actually, being here with you as an expert on science philanthropy, but also with you in the audience, because I think we have a really rich discussion ahead of us, and I think you are probably all experts on the topics, and you can weigh in, and we really want to open up the discussion and hear your points of view as well. And as we all know, philanthropy plays a huge role in advancing science, and that especially in areas that fall outside or may fall outside traditional funding mechanisms. And I think, therefore, it's really, really important because it can obviously support early stage research, but also enabling bold interdisciplinary collaborations. And I think in science, this is really important to learn from each other and also go into a field that traditionally doesn't have as much funding as other disciplinaries, for example. And I would say that philanthropic organizations are uniquely positioned to really take bold ideas, fund bold ideas, and also can act obviously swift and faster than other organizations. And I think over the last days we always talked about this a lot, that we have to be faster in funding, and also we have to be faster in making great discoveries and also bring them to action. And I think philanthropy plays a major role. And today in this roundtable we want to explore how these foundations are shaping the future of science, which is a big thing, I would say. And we want to look at challenges they are facing, and also how they are helping to really bridge the gap between science and society, which is really important, in particular nowadays. And I think even here we have to be bolder and faster, jump wider. And so I think this is what we really want to focus on in the discussion. Yes, and we have here an exciting group of panelists, so welcome and thank you for being here. And I will start with a quick introduction, and I think I might just jump around a little bit. So we have Thomas Bjørnholm here. Welcome. He's Chief Scientific Officer at the Wilhelm Foundation in Denmark, and with a background as Pro-Rector at the University of Copenhagen, he brings deep insights into connecting research and innovation with society. And yeah, as I already said, I'm looking forward to dive deeper into this aspect. Then we have on this side Rolf-Dieter Heuer. Welcome. He is former director of CERN and now represents the Wilhelm and Else Heraeus Foundation. And he led some of the most ambitious scientific initiatives of our times. And I'm sure he will tell us a little bit more about that. I'm really excited to hear about it. So welcome, Rolf-Dieter. Then, again, on my left side here, we have Brooke Smith. She is Director of Science and Society at the Kavli Foundation in the US. And here she leads efforts to connect science with communities and also public discourses. And I'm really excited. And I think it's such an important work that you are doing. So we are looking forward to hear more about that too. And you have a diverse background, in particular, I think, in science communication and public engagement. Welcome and thank you for being here. And then last but not least, we have David Spergel. He is president of the Simons Foundation and also the Simons Foundation International. And he has done some brilliant work in astrophysics. And I think he's known in particular for championing basic research in mathematics and science. And thank you so much also for being here. And I would say we jump straight away in the discussion because we don't have too much time, so no time to lose. And I would like to start with asking you to give us a small or a quick statement on an example in your current field of work where philanthropy really accelerates scientific progresses today? And I don't know, who wants to start? I open the floor. Please.
Okay, I can start. At some stage I was still young. And as a young researcher, you want to go to conferences. And the German Physical Society has its yearly conferences, but there's not so much money in the budget of the universities. And the Wilhelm and Heraeus Foundation supports young researchers to go to such conferences. And this was really a big step forward, and it was actually an international conference already. And I was just reporting about my diploma thesis. So at that stage, and that accelerated everything. So fitting with the foundation, fitting with my career, not so bad.
Thank you so much. Maybe we.
So let me give examples of both the smallest and the biggest grant we give that I think are effective. The smallest grant is we give grants to travel grants to mathematicians that are grants of $8,000 a year for 5 years to faculty who don't have any other grant funding. We give 1,000 of them across the U.S. And these are people who get to go to conferences who wouldn't otherwise. We're able to operate much more lower cost and efficiently in some ways than federal funding, so we can give these tiny grants. The other thing we can do is we can take on big risky projects early. So we're funding what's called the Simons Observatory that's looking for leftover radiation from the microwave background, gravitational waves from the early universe. We were the initial funders in a substantial one. Right now it is co-funded by the National Science Foundation, Department of Energy, the Japanese Science, JSPS, the Japanese Science Agency, significant funding from the UK, and so it's become a major project. This is now 7 or 8 years in. We were able to start this project much earlier and accelerate probably its development by about 5 years. So sometimes we can do things earlier, we can de-risk them, we can start things that cross boundaries, I think is quite important.
Thank you so much. Maybe we go on with Brooke.
Yes, that's great. Thank you. And my example builds on some of the points that David has already made. As noted, I'm at the Kavli Foundation. We're in the United States in Los Angeles, but we're an international foundation that funds basic science, particularly in the areas of astrophysics, neuroscience, and nanoscience. And we have a program to strengthen the connection between science and society, which is what I run at the foundation. I think that philanthropy, to your question of how philanthropy can make a difference, a lot of what philanthropy is built around is filling spaces that aren't traditionally filled by public funding. So we've heard some stories of travel grants, de-risking early scientific ideas, which we also do. The example that I want to share in this idea of cross-collaboration, which is harder to fund sometimes, is one of the things we fund at the foundation in our program is collaborations of scientists doing groundbreaking research to work with sociologists, ethicists, civic engagement leaders, so that we can be thinking early on about what is this work going to mean for society and how can you partner with people who have the rubric and training to think through what that might look like. So we actually put a call out last year to the scientists we fund and asked them, is there anything you're working on that you think is going to potentially be really transformational in society? And can we provide funding for you to work with other experts to think through those social and societal issues? And one of the number one things we heard from our grantees was, thank you for asking this. We think about this, but we don't know what to do about it, and we don't know where to get money to make that happen. So as a result, we have a series of projects that we're funding. For example, we have an institute at Oxford that works on nanoscience of the cell, and they are doing a research project where they're looking at whether or not there's a cellular differentiation in brain cells of people who died by suicide versus other ways of death. And they know that if they find anything or what they're thinking about is so potentially interesting, controversial, could be uncomfortable. So they brought in folks from the social sciences, humanities, and ethics to work side by side with them to think about what the implication could be. So it's not about regulatory compliance, it's about what does this mean for society and how can we build in those bridges earlier.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, I represent the Danish Foundation, a private foundation, and we have a quite strong tradition in Denmark that companies are owned by foundations in one way or another. And in my case, it's the Velux Window Company. So, and more or less, all the money produced in this company is given back every year to society to make the world a little bit better than yesterday. And we do it in many ways. Our main emphasis in research is on technical and natural sciences. And as a foundation, we have the freedom to be, experimenting. So in addition to more traditional ways with consensus-driven evaluations and so on, we also have what we call an experiment, where researchers can submit an idea on two pages of paper, and it's anonymously evaluated by a panel that never meets. So there's no consensus; it's just the rating of the originality of the idea. And it's a small grant, but it's one of the most popular, I would say, among the researchers, because it really gives them some freedom back, they feel. On the other end of the scale, we also have very big, sort of more mission-type projects, and the latest we have launched is a project empowering the civil engineering environments in Denmark to become leaders in the green transition of the built environment, which is responsible for more or less a third of the climate footprint that we are currently making.
Wow, thank you so much. I think you want to add on that, right?
Yeah, I think I have to add a little bit,
Yes.
because I just gave my personal example, as you asked.
Which is a
I
perfect example, I
I
think.
just wanted to say that we are also funding other things. So,
Do you want to share how you're doing that?
for example, since roughly 10 years, we are supporting young researchers to learn leadership, because that's not taught at universities. So we call it Leading for Tomorrow. And it's, to my mind, a fantastic program, because they learn, they speak with each other, they speak to leaders from university, from institutions, from industry. And meanwhile, it's so successful, they formed bottom-up an alumni program, and now the older years are teaching the younger years. It's just a fantastic example, which brings especially the future of science forward.
Yeah. Yes, it's always okay to applaud. I think it's good to encourage what's good is going on here. Thank you so much. Let's dive a little deeper into it. So we heard some example what you're doing at your foundation, or also on a personal level. But what is really, for example, we always ask ourselves as Stifterverband, the question is, how do you decide between supporting or funding individual researchers, because we all heard that in your examples, researchers with bold ideas who really want to make a difference, versus also investing in long-term institutional capacity building. So looking at the person, or maybe more on the institution, and supporting, for example, strategy or capacity building on the institutional side. Is there a mechanism you have at your foundation, or is it one or the other? So how do you approach that? And maybe we start with David.
So this is actually one of the debates we're having internally about how to prioritize institutional support versus support of individuals. I think it's a very important principle in general for any foundation to ask, are we doing something that's unique? Institutional support, at least in the United States right now, there are many private individuals as opposed to foundations who will provide support to individual institutions with which they've had long-term relationships. I don't think we should prioritize that, because there are other sources of funds for it. Mm-hmm. I think the institutional support that we can do right now that's most valuable is ones that don't go to an individual institute. So we have funded a number of institutions, and one includes helped start a supercomputer center for all of New York State. Another is funding a joint structural biology center that serves about 20 different universities. Is these kinds of regional centers. I think we can build capacity, and universities don't want to give up their individual donors. I think they do the individual donor thing very well. Let them do that. So because of that, I feel that we can be most effective funding individuals, and also funding collaborations. So a lot of what we do, to go back to a theme you started with, is we try to cross borders. Those are often borders and boundaries between fields, and also borders and boundaries between countries. So funding international collaborations are something that is much easier for a foundation to do, if it's within its rules, than it is for most government funding agencies.
Yeah, and David, do you look at the individual, if it's, or are you more looking at the idea the individual brings to the table? What is it?
We take both approaches. I think it starts with the idea. I think when we look at things like collaborations, we're also looking for the capacity of the leader of the collaboration to enable collaboration. We want someone who will build across fields, who will be supportive of the young people. So we try to evaluate the capacity of the team involved to carry out the planned research.
Yeah, thank you. So maybe let's stay in the US and Brooke, how are you doing it, or what is your focus?
Yeah, and I would start my answer to this question with, I truly believe there is no wrong answer to this question. Both are so important, individuals and institutions, and I don't think this is a choice we should have. But it's really, as David said, what's the right role for your own foundation or your giving? So at the Kavli Foundation, it's actually interesting because we've done a little bit of both, and this is why I feel like I can say both have been impactful and continue to be. The Kavli Foundation was founded about 25 years ago. It's our 25th birthday this year, by Fred Kavli, who was a Norwegian immigrant to the United States who started a business and left his fortune all in its entirety to our foundation. And one of the things he started early on in his tenure in philanthropy was he worked to establish institutes at universities in the fields that I mentioned. So there are 20 Kavli institutes around the world in astrophysics, nanoscience, and neuroscience. And what we've done is slowly over the past couple decades is move some of our endowment into an endowment at that institute. And so it's really been an institutional approach. Now, the beauty in that is, I would say this past year, especially for the US-based institutes, where there's been very stochastic funding, those institutes have this nice endowment from us and from others that have matched it. And it's what we've heard from them is they've really been able to weather some of this uncertainty from the public dollars because of that strong endowment. But then fast forward 20 years, and a few years ago, we started to do more funding of individuals. And that's been in the spirit of identifying new promising themes in science that are in our areas and putting out calls specifically for those and funding individuals in those themes. The benefit there is we were able to move really fast, get money in people's pockets right away, and get the science going. So that's been really great for us for what is needed right now in the world. But I would say that there's, like I said, there's no wrong answer because they've both been hugely beneficial. It's just which is the right thing right now for you. And I think institutions and people both matter.
So not too easy, but again, I think many approaches how to do it right, which is great. Thomas, how are you doing it?
Yeah, well, it's very different from the United States because we don't have any personal donors. We pay tax. And it's
we pay a higher tax rate.
You do too. But it's a cultural. Maybe that sounded wrong. It's a cultural thing. The private persons who graduated from the University of Copenhagen, they don't feel they have to give something back in terms of funds. They have paid the tax. That's sort of a cultural thing. And so there is a room for private foundations to also fund the bulk of the open curiosity-driven research, and about 80% of our funds is basically plowed into programs that are very similar to the European Research Council or the national research councils everywhere, where it's the ideas of the researchers that is completely open, and we just provide the funding and don't get in their way. So that's the main thrust of what we do, including this experiment. And then about 15% is for more mission-oriented things, where we put a headline or a direction, and the climate and biodiversity issues is at center for our attention, and has been for the owners of the Velux Group a very big concern for 25 years. And so we try to put a little bit more love in that direction. And Also, democracy and digitalization is another strategic direction where we try to give some extra back to society. And then finally, we are just moving into a new strategy period, and I think it also speaks into the agenda of how we build more competitiveness in Europe, that we would like to contribute to a discussion in Denmark and an action in Denmark and Europe and everywhere, but starting with Denmark, that the very best scientists that got this privilege to get the grants because they have brilliant ideas, that they also challenge themselves and become even more brilliant in what they do by thinking a little bit about maybe not themselves, but how their students can be inspired by also applying what they find out in new companies or existing companies, so that you sort of blend the entrepreneurship and innovation culture more into the elite excellence culture. And I think the next 5-10 years in Denmark, we will have to look at finding the ways where we build on our Danish taxpayer culture, how we can push this agenda and also push it into Europe.
Yeah. Yep. And how do you define the mission, or how do you define in which mission you want to invest? How do you do that at your foundation?
Well, there's a board of the Wilhelm Foundation that sort of defines the directions, and it's through those strategy processes.
Thank you. So how are you doing it?
Well, first of all, I think we are the smallest foundation standing here. So we have to concentrate. We concentrate on physics. But we also concentrate mainly on people, and mainly on young people. Well, we also have senior professorships, but okay. But we start with the schools, with the teachers, students, connect students in seminars, connect students in conferences, and also have brilliant heads which we can try to fund. The main thing is the quality. Yeah? And the quality is being checked by an advisory board. So it's not the management board which decides. Well, the management board decides, but it decides depending on the recommendation of the advisory board. And in the advisory board, we have a variety of people who to cover essentially all the fields. And this helps us to really select the best proposals, the best applications. And that, to some extent, also helps very much for the sustainability and development through the whole career. And what we just a few days ago introduced was fellowships for young researchers for 2 years, 100,000 euro. They can do with it what they want. Of course, not making private trips, okay? However, use it for material, use it for students, whatever. So similar to the Sloan Fellowships. So we really try to support the researchers from the youngest to the oldest as much as we can.
Yeah.
And all based on quality. That's the main thing.
And how do you make sure, because when you start in schools, you probably also need partnerships, or how do you make sure that the students and pupils find you and find or send in their proposal? How does that work?
That was much easier before the private act, whatever, so that we could approach, for example, the pupils who were just doing their last year. This is now not possible. We have to go through the university. But they know us and they talk about us. Yeah? I mean, if you have the first time some funding from the Wilhelm and Else Heraeus Foundation as a student, you tell the others. Yeah? And so it's, in German, it's Mund-to-Mund propaganda.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
and that works pretty well.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Brooke. Your work focuses on really connecting science with society. And how do you do that? So how are there any, approaches that work very well in really bridging the gap between discovery or scientific discoveries and public engagement. Are there any, ways of working or addressing the public or working with the public that you can share with us?
Yeah, sure. Thank you for that question. So at the Kavli Foundation, we consider the scientific community and researchers our primary constituents. So our strategies are, because of that, really focused on them. So what I'm about to share has that kind of lane with it, but there's many, many things that are needed in an ecosystem of how we engage with the public. So just in terms of thinking about scientific researchers and their connection to the public, we've seen a couple of things that are really powerful. And the one thing I want to mention that's a backdrop to all this is I do feel strongly that the power of funding this work makes a big difference in this work happening. I know that that seems obvious, but in general, any public engagement that happens, or if you're a scientist who wants to communicate with another audience, that tends to be something that you have to figure out on your own and do on your own time, at lunch or in the evenings or on weekends. That's not part of your research. And we really try to change that formula by offering funding to say, no, this is a valuable part of being a scientist. So the two things we focus on, first I mentioned earlier, so I'll just share it really briefly, which is offering grant funding opportunities to work on projects that work with other experts, which is really important to us. Because even though you might have a PhD in astrophysics, that doesn't necessarily mean you know how communities work and how to engage with communities. And so we try to then provide funding for those other experts to come in, including civic engagement folks, to partner with scientists. And those collaborations can look very different depending on what that science is and what and why it matters to society. The other thing we do is we try to build capacity of scientists to even understand what this world looks like. We have found a number of times when we've put calls out to our scientific community asking, are you interested in engaging the public? What are your ideas? Often the vast majority of those ideas are, yes, please fund me to go do a lecture in my town. Please fund me to do a lecture at my university, which is useful for some things, but typically it's around, I'd like to build trust with people about science, so go fund me to go talk at them for an hour. And we know from the social sciences that's not actually how you build trust and build relationships. So we also have another series of programs where we offer funding to scientists to build their capacity and their skills, not just to communicate better, but to really understand that trust in science is not actually about science literacy, it's about relationships and listening with communities. And so what we found is if scientists really want to do engagement, they need to stop and think about what is engagement and why do I want to do it before they propose an actual project to do it. So we offer funding and bring in, there's a lot of great experts in this area who come from other areas. I'm looking at Erica Kimmerling, who's sitting in the audience right now, who's at Aztec in the US, who is someone that is a partner with us who does webinars and coaching with our scientists to talk about this very issue. So we support these other experts to come in and help do that. So we find the capacity building grant and the doing projects grant make a really big difference in this space.
Thank you. Do the others have similar funding strategy or grants, David?
So an example of something we do in this area that I think is unusual but it's been very effective is we fund something called Sandbox Films that does science documentaries. And what their goal is to get ideas out there. So they're willing to take risks, engage in communities. So we have really helped raise the visibility of documentaries. And this is something where the most successful films we sell to companies like Netflix and Apple. And one of the films we made was about the crafts. Those of you who know, particularly from France, may remember them from TV in the 80s and 90s. They were geoscientists, volcanologists who died in a volcano, made a film about their lives. It was the runner-up at the Academy Awards, so it was quite visible. It actually made us some money, because it was shown so widely. We don't make profit from that part of our effort, but a good metric there actually is, do people see it? And that program has really helped raise the visibility of science documentaries and encourage filmmakers who have never made science documentaries before to go into this area. And this reaches a very different group of people than we normally reach. And that's been something that I think has worked very well.
Thank you.
We try to look at a little bit from a different angle. And we have a program, meanwhile at CERN. I see the future Director General of CERN over there. That is called Beamline for Schools. What do we want? We want schools applying for doing tests, research at beams at CERN or at DAISY, for example. But it has to be a project which they think through. They propose a project, they work together, so you have cooperation between the pupils, sometimes from different schools. So it's up to 10, I think, 10 pupils. And they propose a project. And so it's fantastic what projects come out there, and then you have a jury which selects the winners, and you can only have 3 or 4 winners per year. But I think the last application was more than 500. And schools all over the world. And it's amazing what you can trigger there. And the people, they are telling, okay, it doesn't matter if we win. We have learned to work together. Mm-hmm. And I think that is as important as telling to society.
Thank you.
Yeah, we have a constant number of activities trying to build science capital all over society, not only in the elite end of science, but also in public schools and in kindergartens. We fund maker spaces, for example, where young people in schools can come and try to use very modern equipment to create things and understand things. And we also, on the other end, we have funded a big natural science museum, a new building for that, and helped in very many ways to how to transmit a better understanding of the world we live in to the general public.
Thank you. So time is running. I have many more questions, but I really want the audience, or to give the audience the chance to ask questions as well. And I see a first hand here. So it would be good if you could stand up so that the camera can pick you up and you could quickly state your name and organization and your question.
My name is Kat Allman. I'm with Digital Science. In a past life, I had a job where I gave sponsorships, not grants, to open source software organizations. And I always made sure when I could that they were unrestricted. So all those pesky overhead things had money going to them. Are your organizations able to fund that background infrastructure work for institutions and projects?
So the example I gave earlier about our Kavli institutes are in that spirit because it's institutional funding and they can use it for whatever they're interested in. But you bring up a powerful tool, which is sponsorships, and we do a lot of sponsorships. I think a lot of foundations do, because you sponsor an idea, a conference, an institution, and that is done in the US anyways as a gift, which means spend it on whatever you want, which allows that kind of flexibility. So I think similar to my earlier point, a collection of different kinds of approaches are all needed, but we definitely, at our foundation and many others, make sure there's space for things that allow for that freedom and appreciate those expenses and that you need to pay for them.
Thank you. Anyone else want?
No,
David?
We give 20% overhead on grants, which is meant for that kind of institutional support.
Yep.
And there's a long and technical discussion on overhead rates that is a very active discussion in the US right now, and I will spare all of you from hearing about this. Institutionally important topic, but we do have a standard policy of providing support. I'd also note, just as I think software is one of the things that is really still in terms of, I think of it as infrastructure for doing science, and something that is undervalued, and something where I think there's opportunity for culture change, in that the scientists who write software are undervalued for faculty jobs. So we have been funding faculty positions, these professors of practice, which exists at medical schools and in engineering schools, with those lines aimed at software developers who've devised vital software for scientific research. And I think this is a change we need to make in the university system, from what I know of it, both in the US and Europe, where we need to, just as we've been able to convince our colleagues over time that people who build vital hardware are an essential part of science and need to be valued for contributions to places like CERN, we need to do the same with people who develop software. So,
Yeah,
Thank
absolutely.
you. We have another question, and I think we also have a second question over there, but we start here. Quickly state your name and institution.
Works. Okay,
And
it works. Hi, so I'm Aditya. I'm from the Max Planck Institute for Radio Astronomy in Bonn. So I'd like to firstly start with an acknowledgement to the Wilhelm and Heraeus Foundation, because if they had not extended the support to researchers at Max Planck to come here, we would not be here in the first place. So thank you so much for that. My question is generally to the panel. So is there a best practices approach for researchers on pitching their ideas to like these organizations? Because it's slightly different when you're pushing to a science foundation or a space agency. When you're pitching to people outside your field, like in philanthropy, family offices, what should be our approach or our outlook when we are pitching the idea? What are they looking for? So thank you.
Quality. Idea. It has to have a striking idea, but also a clear vision what should come out. Not the result itself, but the way to reach the result. That's important. But I think it's really, to my mind, it would be quality.
I think other elements, and this is, I think, a general, question about fundraising, and this is more with private individuals, but also works with foundations. I think you want to convince them that this is something that will not get funded other ways. Yep. So if it's the kind of research that could be funded by the ERC, why isn't this winning in an ERC competition? You have to make the case that this is something that is unique in its capability. There's something about it doesn't fit into standard system. If it's a project, and I think this is something that many scientists don't appreciate, it needs to be well managed. This gets to why I love the science leadership idea you guys have, because I think one of the transitions one has to make as a researcher as you take on bigger projects is management. Third, and this is more true with private individuals than with foundations where you have to apply through systems, you have to convince people that it'll be fun.
Yeah.
So, if you can take them to the radio telescope, all the better.
Yes, and I add to that, if you have fun yourself, I think you will inspire everyone else. So it's really important. We have another question here, and I see many, many questions, so I'm not sure if we can take all of them, but we try.
Yeah, thanks very much. Great panel. My name is Jörg Nievener from the Technical University Munich, and we've been working with about 100 postdocs based at European institutions, brilliant people, and they pointed out an interesting funding gap, and I just wondered what you have to say about this. They were very interested in more collective grants where they can share leadership. They're very fed up with the heroic model of we give to the best and we overload the best people and they then sort of sacrifice their private life and everything, etc. So they were very interested in, we do excellent work, but we want to share the burden, we want to have tandems, we want to be able to hand over leadership, etc. And we weren't really seeing that coming through the funding, which still looks to the best as individuals or structure, but collectives seem to be in between.
Thank you.
I think that's an extremely relevant point, and we also have that discussion in Denmark. And the foundations are, petrifying the system by insisting on individual grants. And even, I would say it's a strong point maybe in Europe to be collaborative and to work together. So we should also design our funding system so it supports that strength. And as I mentioned briefly, we had just tried a new way to fund where we basically say, we have a problem that's important, the green transition of the built environment. Then in Denmark, there are some specific departments who are relevant for that because they work with that and educate there. And then we have designed a program that basically collectively tries to build capacity in that program. Still with the aim to be excellent and have very high quality, but also to build quality that's not already there, and so it's a really difficult it's a difficult journey, but we're trying to find the ways and experimenting with that. So I think that's a very important mega trend that we all have to adapt to.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I would add to that, it's a really great question. And we are doing more of this at Kavli, and the folks who lead our research and science funding are doing and pioneering more. And I would say one of the ways it came up is when we put a call for proposals out in a specific thematic area, like please submit a proposal on this one element of, let's say, like quantum or neuroscience. It doesn't actually say it has to be from an individual. And so we had on a number of occasions some folks come to us and say, we're a collective of 10 people from 10 different institutions. Would you be interested in that? And we said yes. And our proposal process did not say they couldn't or could. It's just that I think people's mindsets are they must just want individuals. And when they asked us, are you willing to be flexible on that? We said, of course, and actually those tend to be some of the most competitive ones that come forward. So I'd also say, don't just assume that the form you get, especially if it's from a private foundation, because we are flexible. We hear this all the time, that if the form looks this way, I have to do it, and I can't talk to anyone, because that's what happens at a government agency, to just ask. And there sometimes is some flexibility, and we can be nimble about that. And I think that would be great to see more of those come forward.
So we just put out a call for collaborative proposals in ecology, the interface between ecology and evolutionary biology. And to give you a sense of the level of interest in doing collaborative work and addressing things, we've asked for just letters of intent of 2 pages. We have 1,000 letters of intent. We plan to fund 3. That's what we have budgeted for. We had not anticipated this level of response. I'm hoping that we will put some more resources in, given the quality, and fund 5. But I think this shows the level of desire for trying to come up with this and the lack of other opportunities for doing something like this.
Thank you. So be quick. We have time, I think, maybe just for 3 more questions. Thank you.
Oscar from the Giant Magellan Telescope. So we're moving into this big infrastructure and science project that requires public and private funding. Can you share how is your strategy with engagements with the government, for example, in the US or here in Europe, to do joint investment maybe?
In our case, no. We stay independent.
Well, we, for example, invested in a museum, so that's maybe 1 billion kroner, and we paid 25%, and the government paid another 25%, and the other foundations. So that's the typical way. We also invested in some of the telescopes, I think, in Europe, but it's a little bit a case by case, and it's all driven by the trust you create through dialogue between the different partners, in between the foundations and the government and the universities. But there's no, written down procedure for doing that or strategy.
I think that there can be a mix of formal processes and informal processes in that space. So we do collaborate with like the NSF, the NIH, the DOE in the US on specific projects and joint funding. I say it in quotes because it typically is we still give a grant and they give a grant, but it was in the same idea, and we looked at proposals together. But to I think what David said earlier, what's also really interesting is when there are these large government-funded projects, when someone comes to us and says, there's this aspect of the telescope that's not being addressed, can you, as a private foundation, look at it? And we see it as a small way to leverage a bigger project. So it's a little squishy because it's not, like you say, a playbook where we all follow it to make that happen. But this is where I have found that there are often leaders of those large projects who have navigated private donors, private foundations, and public funders, and have put together some elegant ways to approach a shared architecture.
Thank you. So the mic is over there.
Yeah, David Popel. I'm a neuroscientist at NYU. The last 10 years as a director of the Max Planck Institute. Of course, you select for excellence, and you look for people. And I don't know how many times the word excellence was used, and I wonder for each of you, do you actually also evaluate the quality of mentorship? I mean, we're doing a pretty bad job. And so when you're selecting these 3 or 100 or 10,000 things, will you actually, you don't yet, but will you actually pay attention to our role as teachers and mentors in the sciences, because we're actually kind of failing.
Thank you. David, what are you doing?
It very much depends on the nature of the project. So for a travel grant of $8,000, we want them to travel. When we're funding a collaboration in neuroscience of $10 million a year, which we do, what we do is we have annual meetings, and the most valuable way I find of evaluating a project is I come to breakfast, and my colleagues come to breakfast, and I sit with tables of graduate students and postdocs only. And so one of the things I look at when we're evaluating our programs, we've been tracking this, we keep track of the ORCID numbers of everyone funded through our programs, and we look to see if they are still publishing 5 years later. For an individual, that's not necessarily a good test, but as we look across the kind of programs we fund, and right now most of our money goes to postdocs and graduate students, we fund projects, we fund institutions, we fund individuals, we fund collaborations, we fund internal research institutes, and we fund building things. Which are most effective at training students and postdocs? It's a question I'd like to answer. It's a question that I've been asking people at other foundations and in governments. Have they actually looked at these different mechanisms, and which has the best outcome for a postdoc to be in a collaboration or funded individually? In 3 or 4 more years, we will have enough data, because we have tracked them, to at least answer that. Because I think one of the most important measures of success of a program is training the next generation and seeing how effective a program or a grant is at doing that. So I think it is very valuable to look at. It's hard to evaluate for an individual proposal in advance. It does sending the message to your grantees for renewal that they're being tracked on evaluations of their students and postdocs. I think the evaluation questions we ask send an important message on what we value. And I think saying we value student and postdoc mentorship is an important message to be constantly giving to our grantees.
Thank you.
One sentence. We try to address this question in the leadership program. Yeah? And it really bears fruit. As I said, the oldies are training now the youngsters.
Perfect. Thank you. So have a look how the Heraeus Foundation is doing it. So we have one last question. Unfortunately, I saw many hands up. I'm sorry about that, but I hope the panelists can stay a little bit longer afterwards. Maybe they're in the cafe to answer additional questions.
If you give me a chair, yes.
We will.
Thank you. I'm Diane from a Marine Research Institute in Madeira Island, Portugal. It sounds like all of your foundations accept proposals. In Portugal, there are fewer foundations that accept proposals. And so we have to look internationally, and a lot of those foundations do not accept unsolicited proposals. So do you have any insider tips, just being on the other side of this world, for those of us who might need to search and seek funding from larger foundations? How can we get our good ideas in sight?
Well, the European programs are, of course, an obvious choice.
In the philanthropic world.
So one of the things we like to say is, while we don't accept unsolicited proposals, we do accept unsolicited ideas. And that helps us design what our proposals look like, because we hear from folks. So just because you don't see a call for proposals that's in your field doesn't mean we don't want to hear from you and hear what you're working on, because that's how we learn, and then that informs. That might be frustrating because it's not money that can be converted in six weeks for your project. But I do think it's really important to share your ideas and share what you wish was funded, because that's how we learn about things.
If you want to organize a seminar on a topical subject, we have binational seminar possibilities. So you have to find somebody in Germany who does it together with you, but it has to be connected to physics, and it has to be a topical, it has to be topical. But then we can fund it.
Thank you.
Yeah, we
Oh,
do primarily open
very
calls.
quick, David.
Sorry, we do open calls. But again, like Kavli, we shape our open calls based on a sense of what is needed out there. So we don't really respond to unsolicited proposals much, but open calls are opportunities.
Thank you so much. So we are in the final round. I want to ask you, all of you, a quick question. So if you look into the future, how should the future of philanthropic in science work? What is your vision there? In one sentence. We start here.
Well, one thing we haven't talked about, so I'll end with this, is the value of collaboration and partnerships among private foundations. We do quite a bit of that, and that is a place that allows us to do more and do more with peers in terms of learning together. If you share an unsolicited idea with, like David, for example, he could tell me, and then that learning network really matters a lot. And we really value our partnerships with our philanthropic partners. And so I think more of that allows us, we don't all need to do the same thing and reinvent the wheel within each organizational silo in terms of learning and sharing. So more partnerships and collaboration.
Thank you.
I would also say more, make it easier to do seamless international collaborations and cross-border collaborations, problem-oriented, interdisciplinary. There are a lot of barriers still between countries and also disciplines, so the more we can lower those barriers, the better.
Thank you.
Well, last year we had a table on collaboration between philanthropic institutions. This year again, and I think we are on a good way. And I think what is important for the future is to get the act together between natural science and social science.
Yes.
That has to come together. Otherwise, we are losing out.
Thank you.
I
David.
think we should think in part of our evaluation of what we do like venture capitalists, in the sense of we should be judged by our most successful thing. That if we are not taking on projects that are high reward, but have a lot of risk with them and fail, and some of our projects aren't successful intellectually, we are not taking on enough risk. I think there's a lot of incentive for government agencies and even within philanthropy to not want to fail. I think we have to be willing to fail and send messages to our grantees, to our grants officers, that we want to take intellectual risks. We want to be venture capitalists in the world of ideas.
Thank you so much.
Thank
you for your time and your insights. Yeah. And keep up the great work you are doing, and also a big thank you to the audience.